Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month is we're continuing the theme that happened in October 2020 as a year after this podcast actually started, and the idea was just talking about being okay to fall. Henry Ford said it this way: "One who fears failure limits his activity." The idea that how one responds to failure can be a bigger impact than the failure itself kind of stretches further with Winston Churchill saying, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." To unpack this topic, I brought a returning guest, Allan Lycka, to share his insight with us and just share just be part of the conversation when it comes to failure and the process of failing and how that may relate or not relate to us moving on. So, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
No worries. And I want to just tell those who are listening. Last month was, World Suicide Awareness Day, and I just want to, if you are listening, you are struggling, I do encourage you to seek professional help. 988 is the National Suicide Crisis Line, but I don't reinvent the wheel. So whatever place, environment, community that you could say these three words, I need help, go there and tell those people that you need help and find help. I always encourage that. With that being said, I know people say better than me, Ellen. I always say this, but I feel that they do. Albert Einstein is one of them, and he says it this way to spark our conversation: a person who never made a mistake never tried anything new. What comes to mind when you hear this quote?
Every one of us makes mistakes. I think everybody should fail as much as they can so that they can have as much success in their life they can. I think failing forward is what people's motto should be, because really that's what happens. If you have never tried, then you're never going to fail, but you're never going to succeed. That is the secret to success. The secret sauce is trying, and that's what you got to do over and over again.
I totally agree. I feel sometimes we kind of we define the idea of success as, certainty, but really there's a lot of uncertainty, and we can never I can't fully say that everything I'm going to do or touch will go well, and part of the process sometimes gets ignored. And I feel that this quote from Albert Einstein kind of mentions the idea that, just like you're saying, Alan, is how we define failure, how we define making a mistake, because I feel that's where, at least for me, and you could kind of share your thoughts, that's where I learned the most. I do well. How do I learn anything if I'm awesome sauce? So
I never fail, because anytime I try something new, I either succeed or I learn something. So where's the failure in that equation? It doesn't exist. And if you look at it through those eyes, you'll have a miracle way of looking at things. Everything I do is a test to see if it'll work. So if you test something, you're not going to fail. All you're doing is looking for bits of information. You're looking for things that are going to tell you clues as to how you're going to succeed.
And I love how you mentioned, it's how we reframe that word, because it's not really failing. Like you said, it's learning more about what may not work this time, or we may have to adapt. And I feel in that regards, if we reframe how we look at failure, how we look at the process, we have a better chance of succeeding and whatever the success is to our subjective lives. I want to ask you, what is your experience? And you've said a little bit. What has your experience been that helped you through some notable mistakes in your life? The ones that you want to share.
When I was applying for medical school, I applied everywhere in North America, and I was rejected. I tried again, and I got accepted by the University of Alberta in Edmonton, where I currently live, and I got after I got accepted in Edmonton, I was also accepted by the University of Calgary. Now, Calgary was where I wanted to be, but I turned them down because I was already living in Edmonton. Now, the same process went on when I was applying for dermatology. I applied to hundreds of schools. I tried and no one wanted me. And then I tried another year and no one wanted me. In fact, my mother-in-law said, "When are you going to give up this crazy idea? It's wrong. You can't just keep." Finally, I was accepted in several places in the United States, and I ended up going to Minneapolis, Minnesota. But again, if you don't try, you're not going to get accepted. And you got to keep trying. You got to keep trying. And, the man who fails is the man who gets knocked down 7 times and stays down 7 times. But if he gets up 8, guess what? He's not a failure.
Yeah. And, I'm just trying to think about, you're mentioning your experience. I remember when I was earlier on the podcast, even when I started, this whole Revive Ministries, I was a notable pause in my life, and I was, struggling to make sense of what was next. I remember a lot of family members and people I cared about were concerned, but at the same time, I had to, I said, it's funny, 2020, I got married in 2020 that year. And I remember people were like, "Oh, aren't you worried?" I'm like, "No, at this moment, I had a lot of people already kind of like, well, we're worried about what's going to happen here and there, but they weren't looking through my lens like yours, Alan." And I kept pressing. I kept figuring out what I wanted to do. And right now, I love what I do. Not only this, but what I do with in the field I am in with mental health, and also just what I do. I even have a gaming channel. I love doing that. So for me, it's just, I just like what a lot of people sometimes nervously, when I was struggling, was trying to protect me from. What really helped me and what sparked this theme for this month is I couldn't listen to them, not because I was disrespectful, but I had to figure out what I wanted to do. And that sometimes may look like failure on the outside, but I learned a lot along the way, if that makes sense.
Well, in 2019, I retired from medicine after a glorious career of 30 years. I wrote an international best-selling book called The Secrets to Living a Fantastic Life. I was going to go around the world speaking on that book. Then came 2020, and guess what? The world had a whole different idea. The world shut down for 2 years because of COVID. There was no place to speak. So what I did was I started a podcast that became a syndicated radio show that's now heard by 5.5 million people a month. So where was the failure?
Exactly.
The answer, the failure would have happened if I just said, I'm going to accept COVID. I'm going to accept what it's doing. I'm going to accept the shutdown of the world. I said, no, I can let the world come to me. And so now on my podcast, I have people listening to me from Russia, from Cambodia, from all the places in the world. We have a surprising number from Israel, from a surprising number from Scotland that all listen to my little show every week.
And, it's just, at least for me, I just remember with COVID, it kind of globally where it was unexpected, and at the same time, it was also something that you'll see people like yourself who just adjusted to find ways. You were going to do a global tour, like you're saying, speaking, but you adjusted and made it something that probably you weren't thinking about doing podcasting before that. Is that?
No, I used to do a podcast when I was a cosmetic surgeon, and I had friends that showed me how to do it. So I got in touch with them again, and they said, sure, we can do it on this too. Why don't you jump aboard? And so I jumped aboard. And so, the secret with doing podcasting is not doing it all yourself. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's all these things that are techie stuff. And I'm not a techie by any means. So I have friends that are techie. You can do better by using other people's knowledge than using your own knowledge. So why not reach out to them?
Yeah, and I feel that in itself is part of what I feel I've learned is knowing where my weak spots are and when I need help at, and where I need to ask for help. And I feel, when it comes to that learning process, that's, it's okay to fall, because a lot of times I feel what I learned is more valuable. I'm not stretching myself everywhere just to do something when I can ask for help in the very beginning. Like I said, I want to give you an opportunity. You shared a little bit of what you've been last time you were here, but I just would like to give an opportunity for you, new returning guests, to have a moment to share an update, a little bit about yourself, anything those who are listening. Just
sure. Well, my history is fascinating, and I'm still amazed by it. In 2003, I was told by a world-leading neurologist that I had better get my affairs in order because I had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and I had 6 months to live. Now, that was a crushing blow. I was a leading cosmetic surgeon. To be told that, it was like, oh my God. So I literally went through all the phases that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says in her book on death and dying. I went through anger. I could have bitten the head off nails. Everybody around me knew I was angry. I went through bargaining. Oh God, please don't let this happen. I'll do anything if you don't let this happen. I went through denial. There's nothing wrong. I can do anything. But my right hand and my right leg were weak. They couldn't do things. But I was smart. I was a very ambidextrous person. So instead of being a right-handed surgeon, I became a left-handed surgeon. I invented tools that didn't even exist back then to keep myself going. But the worst phase is when you go through depression. Depression is a very, very bad thing. That's where you can stay in bed all day looking at the ceiling and saying, why am I doing anything? I'm going to die anyhow. I might as well not do anything. And I know there's dozens, if not hundreds of people out there that are in the depressed stage right now. And if you are, please seek out help, because it's an evil, evil thing. In fact, I got so depressed, I was going to kill myself. But before I did that, I went to my wife, who's a beautiful lady, and I said, dear, what do I have? And she said, I haven't got the faintest idea, but you're smart. You'll figure it out. I laughed at her. I said, I've seen hundreds of doctors. How can you figure that out? And she came up with this beautiful wisdom saying, perhaps you haven't seen the right doctor yet. Now, back then, in the early 2000s, something new was invented. You might have heard about it. It's called the internet. You ever heard of that beast?
Yes.
Well, we live and die by the internet now. But back then, it was so primitive, you had to get on by dial-on connections. That's when you'd put a phone on a cradle, which would phone another phone on the other end. And it would go ria, ria, ria for about 15 minutes. And when it finally connected, you'd get this thing on the other side. And you'd only communicate by a language like DOS, because computers had no memory back then. So you couldn't even type in regular language. So there was no Dr. Google or Dr. Yahoo to help you along the way. You literally had to go this way. And I had friends that were nerds, and they helped me find a doctor in Colorado Springs, Colorado, by the name of David Martz, who had a story very similar to mine. But he got worse much more rapidly And what happened to him is he was on his deathbed within weeks of having this strange illness. And a doctor from Texas came up to him and he looked at David and said, "David, I don't think you have ALS." David whispered, because that's all he could do. The doctor from Texas said, "I think you have chronic Lyme's disease. I think you've been bitten by a tick and it's causing a disease mimicking ALS." David said, "Well, what do I do?" The doctor from Texas said, "You don't need to do anything. I'm going to put you on treatment, and if I'm right, you're going to get miraculously better." And David did. Within days, he was like Lazarus arising from the dead. So, I knew I had to get in touch with David. Here's a guy that had a story very similar to mine. What would I lose if I got in touch with him? So I phoned every hospital in Colorado Springs, Colorado. You see, any doctor can get in touch with any doctor anywhere on the planet if he wants to. And I called every hospital, and I got in touch with him at the Methodist Hospital. And we talked for hours. And he said, "Dr. Lycka, can you come down and see me?" He said, I said, "When?" He said, "What about right now?" I said, "David, it's Thanksgiving in Canada. My wife's invited 50 people over. She'll kill me." He said, "Well, aren't there any planes in Canada?" He wasn't going to let me get off on that excuse. So I went to my wife, my hat in my hand, and I said, "Dear, I'm not going to be here for Thanksgiving." She said, "Where are you going?" "We've got 50 guests." I said, "There's a doctor in Colorado Springs that claims he can help me." She looked at me and she said, "What are you waiting for? I'll pack your bags for you. I'll drive you to the airport. Come on, you're wasting time."
It's amazing.
Women, can you ever understand them? Then, I got to the airport. I flew from Edmonton to Denver, which is a great flight. But then I went from Denver to Colorado Springs. Now that's a rinky-dink flight. Have you ever been on a rinky-dink flight?
Yeah, those are like you're nervous about.
This is one that really is a sketchy one. It goes up and it goes down. At the end of the day, the wind comes off the desert, which causes eddies, which causes turbulence. So you'll be flying along, and all of a sudden, the plane will drop 100 feet. It'll climb back up, and then it'll drop 200 feet. And then it'll climb back up and then drop 300 feet. Now, it's only a 15-minute flight, but by the time we got off, everybody was green. And I didn't chuck my cookies, but a lot of people did. And I got off. I crawled off the plane, and there was David on the tarmac to meet me. And, back then, you could do that. He was a well-known doctor. I was a well-known doctor. So he met me right on the tarmac. And so he said, "Let's talk." And we went and talked for hours. And he said some magic words. He said, "I think history is repeating itself." And so I literally took David's advice, took the medications he advised. And that's why I'm here 20 years later, thriving, teaching people about all this and teaching. But when you look death in the eye and you say, "My God, I've survived," you look at life differently. You know that every day you're given is a second opportunity. So you better live each and every day to the fullest. You better make every day a magic day, because none of us is given another day. There's no guarantee tomorrow will be here. So you better take every day and live it to the fullest. And that's what I tell everybody out there. You need to live every day to the fullest. You need to make every day the specialist day on the planet.
Yeah, and I remember you telling this story last time, and each time I hear it, I feel it speaks a lot about the idea of because internet you mentioned. I remember the dial-up too. I remember that whole process, and there's a difference between information and understanding. We have a lot of information out there, not much understanding of it, and I do commend you because Especially in the mental health field, I would say, getting a second opinion never really happens. A lot of times people feel so low in their whatever they're going through.
But you
That's
look
it.
at the doctor that told me my diagnosis. He
Yeah.
was so dogmatic that
Mm,
this is what I had, that there was nothing else it could be. And I
yeah.
asked him, is there a way to prove the diagnosis? And he said, of course, an autopsy. And I told him, there's no way I'm going to die to prove you wrong.
Yeah. And it's inspiring to hear like that, your friends, just like you said before, your friends helped you during the time of internet without Google, without Ask Jeeves. I remember Ask Jeeves, all these kind of things. And before all that, you found a doctor that had a similar story. And just the support your wife had and bring you going over there, and then you getting it's amazingly inspiring. And I can't imagine you looking at life the same like you ever what was before that. How could you, in the sense of how wonderful, precious, and how short life can be, how short life is. So it's inspiring for me to hear that story. I want to share, and
Well,
thank
and
you.
the other thing you learn is to give back. That the
Of
one of the
course.
two most important things you can do is be grateful for everything. And the second most precious thing you can do is to give back to everybody. Remember, there's so many more people out there that have less than you do. Do you realize that 95% of the people on the planet don't have enough food to eat every day? Do you realize how many people don't have water that they could turn on a tap and get fresh water out of it? Do you realize how many other people on this planet don't live lives like we do in North America?
Hmm. It is extremely humbling. At least for me, I remember in even the church setting, it's complicated because those people. I'm a leader in church, and I know someone will say, "Oh, I beat cancer," right? And everyone's like, you know, hooray! They're like, "Amen." But I know a person just down the aisle on the other side who lost a family member from cancer just a week ago. It's very complicated of understanding that even though you have a good day, it doesn't mean that the person next to you. So I think kindness, especially when we're thinking about being grateful, I try to be kind, and I try not to be nice because nice kind of subjective to me trying to. At least for me, when I think about the word nice, it's not very clear what that means. I'm
Yeah.
kind because I don't really
I just
expect it.
rewrote my book, The Secrets to Living a Fantastic Life, a
Hmm.
second edition.
Hmm.
And I added two things for it. I added the secrets to having every day to be a fantastic day. So it's in the second edition. And the second thing I added was a chapter on being kind, because I think in this world right now, we're lacking kindness. I think the biggest thing we're lacking everywhere is being kind to everybody else. And if you can just picture yourself in somebody else's place and be kind to them, you will be far better off. The world is lacking kindness in these post-COVID days. It probably is because we're going through post-COVID stress disease, but kindness is so lacking. Everybody needs to give their head a shake and adopt a kindness philosophy.
Yeah, and one thing lot of times people say, I say, "How are you?" The first expression is, "I'm busy. I've been really busy." Well, like a lot of times, I don't know how to help. I have this, this, this. I know when I was really struggling, just a kind word. I'm outside. Someone says hi, just say, "How are you doing?" or holds a door. Just these little gestures do a lot. You don't know what the person's going through. The person you're going through maybe a restaurant and someone makes a wrong order. The waitress is nervous. Be kind. You don't know what they made a mistake, but at the same time, I feel like you're saying I do agree that the words we say to each other do matter. How we go about ourselves
You know,
do
you know, if it's
matter.
not going to matter in 50 years, it shouldn't matter in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
So what if you got the wrong order? They can remake
exactly.
it, or
I
you
know.
get to sample another bit of food that you would have never had before. I mean, just think of it. When I say so much of the world doesn't have food today to eat, just be
Mhm.
grateful that you're getting proper food.
Exactly. Yeah, and just a lot of times, when it comes to this title, when I thought, it's okay to fall, when we think about these kind of discussion topics, I think what you're saying, I remember the biggest portion of my healing was helping others became my healing. Serving others became my recovery in a sense. And I feel we can do a lot of good. And like you're saying, when we are not focused on ourselves, your story and what you've been through is inspiring, because you have a understanding of, you know being told something very crass and saying, "Oh, like the doctor first said to you, when he said, your what he thought your prognosis was, but you kept fighting, and you had the support, and it's amazingly, at least for me, even to this day. I know we spoke a year ago. It still is inspiring. I do appreciate your story, and that you continue doing the work that you do. Um, I just want to ask you a question. When it comes to like setbacks, and you mentioned your setbacks, and gaining the understanding. I know we don't all have the same, I guess, resources or context, but what has helped you, like when you were at your lowest? You mentioned you were depressed, and you mentioned the interaction with your wife, but what got you out of the bed? What helped you move on to the next day? And
The first thing is realizing that my wife is probably right, that I probably had not seen the right doctor.
mhm,
Doctors are human. They make
mhm,
mistakes too. They
mhm,
only can know what they know. Okay.
mhm,
And realizing that got me out of the funk and saying, yeah, it's like four blind men attacking an elephant.
mhm,
One touches the trunk and says, an elephant's like that. Another
mhm,
one touches the tail and says, the elephant's like that. Another one touches the leg and says, an elephant's like that. Another one touches the body and says, the elephant's like that. But if you were sighted, you can see the elephant as truly all those things and more. So
mhm.
you got to look at things from all points of view and perspective. And you got to broaden your perspective. And that's what got me out of my funk, is realizing that my extent of knowledge was so jaded by this blackness that was going on in my head that I wasn't seeing the whole picture, that I wasn't looking outside the box. And, many of those doctors were not looking outside the boxes too, because they were so jaded by the systems that they were in. A doctor has 10 minutes to make a diagnosis. And if it doesn't fit nicely in a box, they're not going to go far outside of that. That's the way
Mhm.
healthcare has been given to them now. So I realized that. But the other thing I did is I forgave them for all their lack of knowledge and lack of understanding. And I forgave myself too for the blackness that had descended on me. I was willing to accept another path. And if I failed, fine, but at least I went down trying.
Mhm. You kind of got there before I was going to lead into kindness to forgiveness, but Martin Luther King, I was throwing this quote: "Forgiveness is not an occasional act; it's a constant attitude." What comes to mind when you hear this quote from Martin Luther King Jr.?
Forgiveness is not a one-time thing, it's an all-time thing.
Mhm.
And you don't forgive for the other person, you do it for yourself. If you
Yeah.
don't forgive, it's like drinking poison and expecting
Mhm.
the other person to die. You know, if this anger, this other stuff that goes and boils inside yourself is poison, and it will
Mhm.
kill you just as surely as poison will.
Yeah, and when it comes to forgiveness, it's also not just forgiving the others, but forgiving yourself. A lot of times that could be some of the hardest hurdle, or when it comes to forgiveness. But like you said, forgiveness is doesn't always equate to um, that the relationship will be mended. It's just it allows you. It doesn't negate what has been done to you, but it does releases you from that stuckness, that idea that I am, this person has hurt me. I'm, and this is a process, but forgiveness is, at least from my experience and what I've seen, forgiveness is very key to moving forward in this, because if you get stuck there, a lot of times it can hold us back when it comes to moving forward.
In the 21st century, we had a miracle in South Africa. And what we saw was the end of apartheid. But, people thought that when it ended, there was going to be a bloodbath where blacks took revenge on the whites for all the things they did. But Nelson Mandela and Reverend Tutu, the Archbishop Tutu, said, no, we are going to forgive the whites for what they've done. And there was no retribution. There was no bloodbath. And that's what we have to think of here. Nelson Mandela was asked, you have been in prison for 20 years. Aren't you angry? He said, of course I'm angry, but I forgive those. Otherwise, I'll never be whole.
Yeah. It just goes to show, just like you mentioned with the poison, if you like the idea of not forgiving, how it does more damage to our own self than it does to anything else. The idea is, I always say when it comes to my care, or even those who I work with, personalize what's happening to you. Like you mentioned, when your wife was saying, you may have not met the right doctor, that was a motivation to kind of keep looking deeper. But a lot of times externally things happen. Like you mentioned, doctors may get the diagnosis wrong. They're human. So if we personalize everything externally that we have no control over, a lot of times it doesn't work as well. But at the same time, it doesn't mean you can still be upset. You can still, but at the same time, when it comes to forgiveness, I think what you mentioned with the apartheid and just the idea of how it's more damaging for ourselves to keep it holding on to that hatred and releasing by saying I forgive you. Doesn't mean I don't recognize that it bothered me or it was hurtful, but moving past it. You may not reconcile, but that's not required for forgiveness. It's just forgiving.
Exactly. Forgiveness, as I say, is something you do for yourself, not for the other person. You do it so you can heal your soul, not theirs. They still can be a bad person. They still could be an ignorant person, but you're doing this to help yourself.
Yeah. It just goes to show how much of an impact if we allow things to get stuck within us. And that's why it's so important for us to be kind to each other, because that, like you said, it's not going to be an issue 50 years later. And it's only, what was 5 minutes? If the person got the order wrong, be kind to them, be kind to yourself. I want to ask you the last question as we kind of close out. What would you want people to be reminded in the regards to, and we talked about this quite a bit, but through your experience, through your setbacks, what would you like the people to remember in this October? It's been kind of tradition in this podcast that we talk about this, because I don't see it often talked about, but when it comes to failure and moving on and forgiveness and being kind, what would you like people to remember this year?
I would like people to remember that it's okay to fail. It's not okay not to try. And if you don't try, you'll never fail, but you'll never succeed. So you must try. You must try. And you must keep trying, even though you fall flat on your bum. I have a grandchild that's learning to walk. It's so amazing to see that. He gets up, he falls down. He gets up, he falls down. He gets up, he falls down. Do you think that stops him from 1 minute from trying again?
Yeah.
No, it keeps on going.
Yeah.
I had my youngest child had problems tying her shoelaces. And, she kept trying until she finally got it. This is the thing that's found innately in every one of us. You just have to rekindle that fire.
I love what one of my nieces, we were playing, I think, Stratego. You ever play that game, Stratego? It's like that chess game, sort of like, yeah. I beat her a couple times, and they call me Uncle Baba. That's how my nieces, and they said, Uncle Baba, can I borrow this game so I could practice and then I could beat you? And for me, I thought it was amazing because this kid, she was probably 6 or 7 or 8, and she didn't see every time I beat her as like, oh, she failed. She said, you know what? I need more practice. Let me practice so I could go ahead and play you again later on so I could beat you. And I feel for me, it makes me smile each day when I think about that, because
it was like I was playing checkers with one of my granddaughters, and I beat her every time, and she said, well, we need to practice some more. Let's do it again.
I think that it's just so refreshing to hear that kind of attitude towards any obstacle. You're in Canada right now, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm up in Edmonton, Alberta.
Okay, so like, Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So a lot of people say that. So.
And he also said it's not where the puck is; it's where the puck's going to be. So if you don't look where the puck's going to be, you're not going to be a success either.
Yeah. So I do feel all of this, those who are listening, it's about not failing. It's about keep trying, I guess, and the idea is that we're human. Be kinder to yourself and those around you. Those are my final thoughts as we wrap up. It's always a pleasure to have you on, Alan. Any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I would like to give everybody a gift. And the gift I'd like to give everybody is a snapshot of where they are in their life, in their fantastic life. I've put together a nice little questionnaire called the Life Quality Assessment, lifequalityassessment.com. It's 25 short questions, and it'll show you where you are exactly in your journey to a fantastic life. And accompanying that, once you take the questionnaire, there's a manual that'll show you how to get to the next level. And there's also some instruction on how to make every day a fantastic day. So every day of your life will be fantastic, so it won't be wasted going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Allan. I'm gonna, those who are listening, there'll be a link in the notes below so you could find out more about the questionnaire, and then to find out, it's just a wonderful thing that you're. Is there anything else that you'd like to share regarding that for those who are not sure what it really means when quality of life? Are these questions hard, or is this
these questions will take 5 to 10 minutes to do, and it just shows exactly where you are. You might say, oh, geez, my life's terrible. Fine, that means you're going to move forward. You might say, my life is fantastic, but then guess what? You should keep it there. So you need to really assess yourself all the time so you can stay with the highest quality of life that you can.
Again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight with us today. Like I said, all the information that Dr. Allan has shared will be in the notes. You can find out more there. I just want to share those who are listening. Remember to stay updated by Revive Ministries through the website reviveministriesfl.com. It's the best hub to find out more. This is goodbye from Revive Ministry Podcast, leaving you with this last quote. It's from Anne Radmacher. We talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not really giving. Forgiveness is really giving a gift to yourself. Have compassion to forgive others and the courage to to forgive yourself.